Hi, I'm Shelley Wood, the managing editor at TCTMD. This is On Record, a regular program exploring hot topics in interventional cardiology and beyond. And of course, it's virtual because we're not meeting in person at the studios in New York or at a meeting around the world. We do this every year, which is summing up the top news in cardiology of the year. A little bit different this year than other years. I've got Karol Watson and Davide Capodanno here to tell me their top stories from 2020. Thank you both for joining me today. This is an episode of On Record that we do every year where we try to sum up the top news in cardiology. But of course, 2020 is a very different year. I think we better start with COVID-19. It's had a huge impact on the delivery of cardiology care, on research, on practice. Davide, do you want to go first for me? Tell me a little bit about what the impact have been of this pandemic in Italy.
Well, Shelley, first of all, thank you for having me. Yes, COVID-19 is obviously the elephant in the room in all stories that regards 2020. Well, we are at the after peak of the second wave in Italy. So like many countries in Europe, so we are in the descending phase, but this means, of course, a long tail of deaths, which have like 600, 700 per day at this moment. So horrible, of course. We have to be optimistic. We are looking forward to the vaccine. This is where we are. It's a very different second wave as compared with the first one, I must say, because in the first one, everything was locked down. Everyone didn't know what to do, etc. Even at the hospital, I must say. Now we are at least psychologically in a phase in which we feel that we have to live together until we will all got the vaccine, meaning that, of course, we are doing our procedures in elective patients sometimes. We are doing the TAVI, and we have a special pathways for these patients, which is a big difference as compared with the first wave.
Yeah, we were talking before we started filming about the STEMIs, the missing STEMIs, because some of that data, everyone was talking about it on Twitter before we saw the data, but Italy has reported formal numbers that echo what we've seen in other countries, around a 40% drop. And a lot of people said with the second wave, will we see the STEMIs showing up at hospital now that people know hospitals are safe, they still need to get their symptoms checked out? What's happening to the missing STEMIs in phase 2?
Well, there is the feeling that these are people left behind in a way, because the numbers dropped clearly and with a consistent patterns in several countries, because yes, 40% decrease in non-STEMI, particularly 20% decrease in STEMI, national data reported, but obviously we cannot think that these patients do not have myocardial infarction anymore. So of course we are concerned that many people have late access to the hospital, maybe they die at home. This is really terrible, and it's very important that doctors officially and in the public domain mention that, because people have not to fear about the hospital now because there is COVID-19. They have to have continuous access to care.
Sure. I've heard that there's sort of an expected second wave of heart failure that that may be kind of in the wake of these STEMIs that weren't seen acutely. But what about you, Karol? Similar patterns, similar impact?
Very similar. So we have, it's not even clear that our first wave ever ended, but we are now clearly in a second peak. We are back in Los Angeles in lockdown. And we saw the exact same thing that David did. We saw a decrease in STEMIs, which I really believe is just, we're missing them because they're dying silently at home or having their MIs silently at home. They're clearly having STEMIs and STEMIs. We're just not seeing them in the hospital. The interesting thing about the second wave is the first wave, the hospital is filled with COVID, only COVID. Now the hospital is filled with COVID, plus a lot of other stuff, including heart disease. So the hospitals really are strained. We'll see if the numbers bear out that we don't see as many acute coronary syndromes, but I believe we will see more this time, but we have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was this early thought that perhaps somehow COVID-19 was helping heart disease and people weren't having these events, but of course we're long away from that now. I don't want to dwell on COVID the whole time because, of course, actually I remember, Davide, at one point, I want to say this was in the summer, I saw a tweet from you that said, when can we go back to talking about cardiovascular disease? And I almost took that as my cue. On TCTMD, we'd been reporting on so much COVID, and we started to really sort of remind our readers that yes, we are a cardiology news website, but other impacts of COVID we should touch on. I mean, the groundswell of COVID-19 research in and of itself has been incredible related to heart disease. But let me pitch it to you guys. What, in terms of cardiology advances this year, both related to the pandemic and not, give us some highlights. David, start with you.
Yes, just as a final mention of this COVID story, I think the whole world of conferences has been changed maybe forever by the COVID-19 pandemic. So the way we behaved before this pandemic probably will be different. See, we are having a Zoom call very easy, and probably this is no way to return to the old fashion. So let's say in terms of research, it's unbelievable that even in these situations, many of the most anticipated trials were completed regularly. Of course, the big story of the year for me is ischemia that was completed already in November last year, but was published formally in 2020. So this is the birth date of this trial in the literature. And of course, I will not go back to the results that everyone knows, but I think this will be a trial that has to say a lot still with subgroup analysis, with a lot of more interpretation with the new guidelines, maybe one day to incorporate the results. So this is for me the big highlight of the year. And then, of course, I think there was something interesting in the field of antithrombotic therapy. As usual, there are many trials in this domain. And I'm thinking of trials in patients who bleed a lot, so high risk of bleeding, both in the device and drug arenas, because for the device, we had Onyx 1, which was a trial of a drug-eluting stent versus another drug-eluting stent on a background of 1 month of dual antiplatelet therapy. And talking about the antithrombotic therapy trials, I'm thinking loud of TICO, which was another trial of monotherapy with ticagrelor in patients with ACS. And more recently, a trial of de-escalation, another interesting new concept, which was host-reduced, with the prasugrel shifted from 10 milligram to 5 milligram. So there is a lot boiling in the arena of antithrombotics as usual. And these were, for me, the highlights in the interventional cardiology field.
Great, thank you. I think that with ischemia, it's particularly funny that people are calling the publication the birth date, because for years we've been hearing that, oh, why are these simultaneous publications happening at the same time as they're being presented? We don't get to discuss, and there should be a delay. And then with ischemia, there was a delay. It was presented at AHA and then published around ACC, and everyone was irate that they couldn't get their hands on the data as soon as they'd heard about it. So you can't win, I think, if you're going to.
But we do need to see the publication. So I agree with David. I consider the publication the date that we saw this trial.
Date of birth.
We really had to dissect every bit of it.
And I must say that probably they were very smart as well, because the trial were public domain, and then there were so many discussions on Twitter and social media, whatever, and they had time to digest the message, the interpretation. In the end, in the publication, it was pristine and no one.
Yeah, incorporate all of that. Yeah. Karol, zoom out for us. There's some other things beyond interventional cardiology, of course.
Yes, there is a lot of interesting data from the world of prevention. Let's call this the year of the SGLT2 inhibitors. We saw several trials that had impact. So we've seen a number of trials of SGLT2 inhibitors in heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. We saw another one this year, Emperor Reduced, which again showed consistent results. SGLT2 inhibitors, each and every one that's been studied to date, has shown a reduction in heart failure with reduced ejection fraction.
Even in the absence of diabetes.
Even in the absence of diabetes. So again, I think in cardiology, we have to understand these are now cardiac drugs in a number of cases, not just diabetes drugs. We also saw benefits of SGLT2 inhibitors in chronic kidney disease with DAPA-CKD. So that's another consistent result we've seen with SGLT2 inhibitors. And we have to remember, the heart almost never fails alone. It usually takes the kidneys with them. So to find one drug that can have benefit in heart failure with reduced ejection fraction and chronic kidney disease, that's a win-win.
Yeah.
I was very interested in the Samson trial, because this trial looked at statin intolerant patients and gave them a very clever crossover of empty bottles placebo bottles and active statin, and they could see no difference in statin-associated side effects. So that was really important to help us craft and think about the conversations we have with our patients surrounding statin intolerance.
Yeah.
And finally, in the world of prevention, we've gone back and forth about omega-3 fatty acids, fish oils. They're great. No, they're not. Well, we don't see any benefit. Oh, but we do see benefits. So we'll all remember the excitement from the Reduce It trial, where omega-3 showed significant results and benefit for patients with elevated triglycerides at risk for cardiovascular disease. We thought we would see another trial that could confirm that with the Strength trial, but this trial showed no benefit at all. No. So again, we're starting to think, was it the placebo in Reduce It, which was mineral oil, which was not really inert and which had a number of negative effects like increased CRP and increased LDL? Was it the EPA only in Reduce It versus EPA plus DHA in Strength? Was it? We don't know. We just don't know. So we're starting to really think about omega-3s.
Yeah. And there was the signal of atrial fibrillation that came out of Strength as well that set people talking.
That's also true. All of the omega-3 trials, Reduce It and Strength, have shown the signal for atrial fibrillation, which we had no idea.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I know there's a lot of, especially some outspoken trialists had their say over those too. Yeah. So they made it fun to report on, that's for sure. I do want to go back to something that Davide said earlier, which is sort of the way that research has managed to proceed despite the pandemic in the cardiovascular sphere. Is this going to be able to deliver as time goes on? I'm just wondering, am I going to have anything to write about next year? Are there any big trials that are going to be able to wrap up given everything else going on? Why don't we sort of end our conversation about best of 2020 with looking forward? What's happening next year?
Well, I think the timeline 2021 means that probably we will have the results of a large, highly anticipated trial in the field of antithrombotics again for high bleeding risk patients, which is Master DAPT. Okay. So Master DAPT is a trial intended specifically for patients at high bleeding risk. Not variance with trials like LEADERS-3 or Onyx 1 that I mentioned. It's not a comparison of devices, but it's a comparison of antithrombotic strategies. So this is the trial that we really address whether an abbreviated duration of antithrombotic therapy is better or worse than a longer duration of antithrombotic therapy in patients at high bleeding risk. So this is the real question, because we know that giving less means less bleeding, but we want to know whether giving less is also as protective as giving more. So it's a complex design, and the trial has terminated the recruitment on time. Now they have the challenge, of course, of the follow-up retention because of these problems with the pandemic, but I trust they will be able to present maybe at the time of the ESC Digital next year. Let's hope this will be the case.
Yeah, okay. Karol?
Well, I'm hoping to see Emperor preserved next year, so we can see if the benefits of SGLT2 inhibitors extend to heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. So I'm hoping. Okay.
Well, I also think we're all hoping for a vaccine to be able to maybe hit the road and see each other face to face at some point soon. And I have to say, though, the amount of sort of political discussion around vaccines and around masks and everything else, I am looking forward to some of that maybe waning in 2021, and sort of a resurgence of respect for science and an understanding of its flaws when it's moving at the pace that we've seen this past year. So fingers crossed for that. I know how busy you both are. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about some of this with me today. So thank you both so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you both.